Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Gregory Forth. He was a professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta for more than 3 decades. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. And today we're going to talk about his latest book, Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid. So, Dr. Forth, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us about the hominins that were discovered on Flores before we get into the story about the ape human that people who live on Flores told you about.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we're talking primarily about what's been called Homo floresiensis, which is considered a new species of hominin, or it was after it was discovered in late 2003. The discovery wasn't actually, it was kept secret and it wasn't announced until October 2004. There was evidence going back to the 1950s for a presence of ancient hominins of some sort on Flores. That came mainly from the work of an amateur archaeologist, a Catholic priest by the name of Verhoeven, a Dutch Catholic priest. That find was followed up in the 1990s, really beginning in the 1990s, by a team mostly comprised of Australian paleoanthropologists and archaeologists, and Indonesian paleoanthropologists as well. The researchers were excavating in a cave called Liang Bua, which is in western Flores, hoping to find something hominin or human-like that apparently had lived in the mid-Pleistocene, or whose ancestors had lived in the mid-Pleistocene and possibly hunted stegodons, ancient elephant-like animals. What they found instead, quite fortuitously, quite by accident, was a very small hominin, which looked like nothing they'd ever seen before. It stood just over a meter tall. I'm talking about the type specimen now. Subsequently, there were discovered other remains of other specimens of evidently the same species. In fact, as many as 13 or 14. I think the total is now. The initial dates assigned and determined were as recent as 12,000 years ago, which is is just yesterday, or less than yesterday in geological terms, and it coincided with a time well after Homo sapiens had entered the Indonesian region, although not necessarily Flores Island. So, yeah, I mean, this was a remarkable discovery. As I said, the type specimen, just to talk of that, was small, was physically archaic or primitive, as paleontologists say. It looked, in many respects, it was subsequently determined, in many respects, more like Australopithecines, pre-Homo hominins, or in some regards even, like modern apes, chimpanzees, gibbons, and so on, in terms of various anatomical features. Also, the brain was, I can't remember the exact figure, it's been revised a few times, but it was around 400 cubic centimeters in size, the brain, which is about the same size as as a chimpanzees, and was small even in relation to the hominins' small body size. So yeah, it's one of the most remarkable paleoanthropological discoveries in what easily the last half century, I would guess.
And how is this species related to other hominin species in terms of a timeline and relationship to other hominin species? Where is it placed exactly?
Well, that's disputed. I mean, one theory was that excuse me, the very small Homo floresiensis was a product of what's called island dwarfing, and that it therefore may have descended from something like an erectine, a Homo erectus, that somehow reached the island of Flores a very long time ago. How it got there, whatever its descent, is another remaining question, because there was never apparently any land bridge between Flores and the next island west, which is Sumbawa. It's not certain that it came from Sumbawa. It may have come from Sulawesi, a large island to the north. But another theory is that Homo floresiensis descends from similarly small hominins, which again reached the island a long time ago by what means has yet to be determined. That there is, I mean, since Homo floresiensis was discovered, there's been a concentration by the discovery team on the region of central Flores, where the stegodon, the ancient element fossils, were found. And the team worked for years and years there. Finally, with much persistence, they discovered the remains of another small hominin, apparently even smaller than floresiensis, that goes back about 700,000 years. And of course, there's a speculation that this could have been the ancestor of Homo floresiensis, but again, that's yet to be determined. I have a few things to say about that, or something to say about that in the book, but maybe we can leave that until a bit later on.
Yes, certainly. Let's get into the anthropological work you did on that island, the island of Flores. So, what people or peoples did you study, and what can you tell us about them?
Okay, I first began work on Flores back in in earnest back in 1984, so rather a long time ago. That was after doing doctoral research on another Indonesian island called Sumba in the 1970s. Most of my work on Flores, and the place where I started, was among a people called Nage, and one reason, a good reason, I began with Nage is because virtually nothing had been published about them before. Before I went there. So my brief was pretty wide. I wanted to learn about the Nage, about their traditional social system, their general culture, indigenous religion, all these sorts of things, and to put those, among other things, in the context, try and put those in the framework of what we knew, we better knew about other cultures, other peoples around about who'd been, more comprehensively studied in the past. So in the early days, a lot of my focus was on kinship and marriage, local organization, clan organization, but also on conceptual, cosmological matters. yeah, in a word, the local religion. It wasn't long after I arrived on Flores in 1984, however, that I started hearing in Nage country about hominoids, non-human beings that had survived in Nage country until a time when, certainly when the Nage ancestors were there, had already arrived also. These were, well, I started to collect descriptions, of course. These were described as small and hairy-bodied, but you know, erect standing, bipedal, having lived high on the slopes of a nearby volcano in a cave or caves. But however, they were extinct. People said, well, you know, they died out, you know, several hundred years ago. But yeah, no, I mean, at first, beings of that sort, I treated entirely as parts of the local cosmology, local religion, as symbolic entities that, for some reason, Nage had decided to develop and you know, maintain stories about. So yeah, those were the early days in Nage country. I published on a variety of topics. Although I'll just say that also in the 1980s, I became, in my research on Flores, and I went back every couple of years or so until, what, 3-4 years back was my most recent trip. But during the 1980s, I became more and more interested in ethnobiology, which is a kind of vernacular biology, is local people's knowledge in this or that or some other form of the natural world. And more particularly, I've always been interested in ethnozoology, which is what local people know and think about animals that they're familiar with in you know, within their territory. So that as well fed into my interest in hominoids on Flores, particularly as local people are inclined to describe them as animals, and as animals that are, yeah, just as natural, you might say, as other animals which are more common and more familiar. I can follow up, leading more directly into the ape-man, if you
Yes,
like.
please get
Yeah,
us into that and tell us
yeah.
about.
So, okay. Well, I in what 21, 23, I began visiting another part of Flores, further to the east, in a region called Leo. You know, I came to know the Leo people. In 2003, I learned that they too spoke of local hominins, or hominoids, I should say, quite similar to the Nage variety. The most important difference was that Leo people claimed that these creatures were still alive. Very rare, but still existed, and that you know, a few people had actually encountered them. So that was, you know, interesting comparative information, and I duly recorded it. Then, of course, in the following year, so this is 2003, in the following year, 2004, the story broke worldwide in the media about the discovery of Homo floresiensis, together with reconstructions and descriptions, brief descriptions of what that fossil hominin would have looked like. And I can remember thinking, "Oh my God, this this looks very much like what I've been hearing about on Flores and among present day people, and more specifically, what I've been hearing about from the Leo people who spoke of a being, a hominoid called Laihoa, which is what I, after due consideration, decided to call an ape-man. Partly or largely because they describe it as a creature which is intermediate, halfway between a human, meaning a modern human, and an ape.
So, is there some scientific validity to the kinds of hominoids the Leo people describe? I mean, is there any evidence that those creatures are really there on Flores?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is no physical evidence, or at least not direct physical evidence in the form of a body that is recent and either dead or alive. Talking about physical evidence, there is the context, of course, of Homo floresiensis and evidently other small-bodied hominins, which go back a very long way, survived for some considerable time on Flores. Perhaps going back as much as a million years ago. Otherwise, the evidence comes from the statements, the reports of local people, which is not sufficient for scientific or academic paleontology or zoology. Some biologists, some zoologists, and some paleoanthropologists included, don't dismiss the possible validity of ethnographic. We're talking about ethnographic evidence, but my impression is that many more do, and indeed that my hypothesis, which needs some qualification actually, because I don't say, that these things for certain, absolutely exist up to the present day on Flores Island. I discussed that as, or I conclude that would be the best explanation. I spend a good part of the book exploring other possible interpretations of what Leo people, for example, are saying, and I conclude that following the principle of Occam's razor and so on, that the simplest explanation would be that they're seeing something, or maybe their parents and grandparents saw something that corresponds with Homo floresiensis. For example, and for the most part, in recent times, in other words, that the simplest explanation is that something like Floresiensis has survived into historical times. But I've yet to hear, and I'm hoping to hear, an explanation of why that would be impossible. I don't see it as impossible myself, but it seems to be something that is not conceivable to many people, not just academics or scientists, indeed, but more generally in the West. I think, of course, Leo people themselves, Flores Islanders, have absolutely no reason, I can confidently say, to assume that something like that, the thing they describe under the heading of Laihoa, is an impossibility. It has to be something completely imaginary.
So you think it's plausible that the ancestors of the Leo people had contact with either Homo floresiensis itself or some descendant of it?
Hmm. Yes, I would add a third possibility, and that is something that descends from another line, um, following from those very early, nearly a million-year-old small-bodied hominins that have been discovered on Flores. In other words, if something, an ancestor, reached the island, say, a million years ago, that provide a lot of time for it to radiate, that is to say, to develop, to evolve, to branch out into, two or more lines, one of which was Homo floresiensis, perhaps, but there may have been others contemporary with Homo floresiensis, and which, yeah, possibly lived longer, survived longer on the island than Homo floresiensis.
And what are other possible explanations for the existence of this ape-man myth without them having had contact with the species
Yeah,
exactly?
talking about contact, that might suggest a more sort of sustained relationship between our hominoid and modern, anatomically modern humans. I just stress that people at present, there are people at present who say that they have seen, briefly, seen ape-man. Um, so that sort of brings it up to date. But as for other explanations, well, one is that what they're describing um, as an ape-man is an imaginary and entirely or largely imaginary being that for some reason they take to be real, and yeah, for some reason they continue to talk about that. They find value, in other words, in talking about these creatures, even though they don't exist. Especially in chapter 3 of my book, quite early on, I tackled the topic, the hypothesis of ape-men as supernatural beings, and I find that the best way to explore that possibility is to compare them with other beings that, by all indications, are imaginary, but which Leo people describe as, yeah, entirely supernatural, as normally invisible. A few people a few special people might get to see them. But yeah, no, I mean, essentially their distinctive features are all supernatural. They're invisible. If they appear, they can disappear. They can change shape. They can harm people, but by purely psychic means, mystical means, non-physical means, and on and on. And my conclusion there at the end of that chapter, or further along in the book, is that really, the Laiho are nothing like the various sorts of spiritual beings that Leo and other Flores Islanders recognize. I mean, for one thing, they're described, the ape-men are described as reproducing, giving birth, coming in two sexes, needing to eat, and they're mortal, and all the rest of it. These are not creatures that are typically given to spirits, of course, described as immortal as far as they know. Although, unlike modern religionists, Modern people who subscribe to one of the world religions, for example, they don't have any fixed, certainly no written theology that concerns all these matters. But from talking to them over a number of years, I mean, one in languages they understand themselves. Yeah, it's quite clear that they even have they do have a definition of what we can call a spiritual being, including God, and that is something which is only spirit, or something which lacks a body. Yeah, ape-men certainly have bodies. So that was one alternative hypothesis. Another was that the ape-men are not. They're not hominoids or hominins, maybe hominoids but not hominins. Is that what they're talking about ultimately is monkeys. And I'll just say that there are no apes on Flores or any of those eastern islands. The closest place where we find apes is Borneo, well off to the northwest. The only primates, non-human primates on Flores are long-tailed macaques, and they were actually brought by humans about several thousand years ago. So they're not naturally, they're not native to Flores in the full sense, but they've certainly survived and prospered there. They are very common animals, and as pets, for example, they can be found, in most Leo villages. So that's one problem with the monkey hypothesis, that the people are thoroughly familiar with monkeys. They describe quite explicitly as well. They describe ape-men as being very different from monkeys. For one thing, the only monkey on Flores is, like I say, is a long-tailed macaque, which, as the name indicates, has indeed a very long tail, a tail longer than its body. Whereas with certain qualifications, they say that ape-men are tailless. There is a notion which I go into early in the book, in chapter 2, as a matter of fact, that ape-men have very short tails, sometimes described as invisible tails, which I explain in terms of their local classification as animals, and this is quite explicit, rather than humans. And the only thing that's human, according to Leo, are people like themselves, in other words, anatomically modern Homo sapiens. So yeah, there are a number of reasons why the monkey hypothesis is not very good. It really doesn't hold a lot of promise. But I mean, another possibility. I said there were no apes. Another bare possibility. I said there were no apes on Flores. Occasionally, it seems, from stories I've recorded, people, outsiders, have brought an ape, a pet gibbon, for example, to Flores. Particularly people who are traders at markets and need to attract audiences to sell their wares, and they typically bring along something unusual, including an unusual animal that will draw the crowds. The commonest kind are snakes, large snakes, pythons, for example, baby crocodiles, this sort of thing. But there have been reports of people bringing what seem to be gibbons, or even in one case orangutans. I spent some time looking into those stories and found that at best this has happened only once or twice over a period of decades, that people have brought an ape as distinct from a monkey to Flores. But nevertheless, I just raised the question, well, is it possible that the biologists have been wrong for a very long time, and that there is some undiscovered ape like a gibbon, some species of gibbon perhaps on Flores. Another bare possibility, I suppose, is that somebody's brought pet apes to the island and they've escaped and managed to reproduce and so on. But yeah, as I show, I mean, these are very, very unlikely, and in fact more unlikely, I should say, than the idea, the possibility that the ape-men are some kind of hominin. I mean, for one thing, there is, of course, a fossil record of physically primitive non-human, non-sapiens hominins on Flores, whereas there's no such fossil record for orangutans or gibbons or what have you, anything other than the long-tailed macaques I mentioned. So yeah, no, there are other things I say as well. And I mean, it's in that light that I'm able to suggest that the best explanation would be that what some Leo people have seen and what they describe is something more primate, more evolved, shall we say, than gibbons or orangutans. Of course, there are other questions which I deal with right at the beginning of the book concerning whether local people haven't been fooling me or deliberately misinforming me. I think I've got some pretty good arguments that weigh against that possibility. And not to go into details, but for one thing, people all over the territory, all over Leo territory, describe much the same thing. Be they people who've only heard about ape-men and say they've never seen one, or be they eyewitnesses. The accounts, by the way, are not identical. The physical descriptions are not identical. They do show some variation, but nevertheless, it's clear they're talking about the same thing, whatever its status. But at the same time, the variations, of course, mean they're not just rehearsing, repeating a stereotype. The kinds of variations that show up in the different reports are the same sorts of variations you'd expect in any mammal, any natural creature, mammals especially, of course, in terms of size differences, distinction between genders, age, and other variations besides. So, I mean, that gave me some confidence as well to conclude that we're not talking about a fictitious being. And of course, I mean, one reason I was able to write the book really was because I had heard about the Leo ape-men, the Laihua, before the discovery of Homo floresiensis. If it had been the other way around, there would have been some possibility, not a great possibility, but some possibility that the ape-men that most people in Leo knew about was a reflection of media reports and so on. Even that isn't terribly likely because most of the people I'm talking about don't have regular access to, not at that time certainly, didn't have regular access to newspapers or other modern media. So the timing was quite important as well.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, even though what people claim is not nearly enough to validate scientifically the idea, in this case, of the existence of another hominin species on Flores, recent or even contemporary, to what extent, as an anthropologist, you think you should take their claims seriously and perhaps as a potential source of evidence to gather with others, perhaps?
This is a terrific question, um, and really is one of the most important, I think, that I address indirectly, at any rate, in the book. And for a long time in anthropology, in social or cultural anthropology, it's been the rule, that the maxim for over 100 years, in fact, that we always need to pay attention to gain good knowledge of what's been called the native's point of view. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean to say that, we always have to accept as absolute truth what individuals or even whole groups of people tell us about the world. But we do need to understand their point of view, their knowledge, you could say, in the broadest sense. And our aim, our first aim, should be to explain it. Why do they say, that there are these things out there, and that they behave in this and that way, and so on. Well, in the case, of course, of something like a long-tailed macaque on Flores, the creatures that are everywhere. When they describe them as stealing crops from fields and being mischievous and biting people and all the rest of it, it's obvious to the ethnographer that this has to be a direct reflection of for want of a better word, reality, because of course we can observe the same things. But even where we can't do that, I think that it should be an alternative. One of the possibilities in explaining the native point of view that they are right. As I say, we don't immediately accept they're right all the time, and that's especially when it comes to matters that can be observed empirically. But I think this has to be accepted as a possibility, and I would at the same time suggest too many anthropologists who, by the way, are subscribe to some form of what's been called social constructionism, cultural constructionism. Most anthropologists would, among other things, would intuitively accept some kinds of ideas as being in a sense, false, incorrect, inaccurate. Most indeed anthropologists, for example, would interpret what I've been saying about speech, so be recognized as being purely imaginary. I mean, I assume the same thing. So where were we? I do. Again, I mean, as an ethnozoologist, especially, I need to give some credence to what people tell me about local non-human animals.
Mm-hmm. So one last question, and I think this is another entirely different domain that we can also talk about related to the topics you explore in your book. And perhaps this one really can be studied scientifically. So what can we learn about how humans relate to, let's say, not quite human animals by studying cases like the Leo people and how they talk about the ape-man?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can I just go back to the last one? Because I had some difficulty, I found, answering it. I suppose one thing I need to say is that we can, as scholars, as scientists, legitimately challenge the hegemony of modern academic science.
Okay.
After all, they are regularly proven wrong, and they need to be proven wrong so they can go back to the drawing board, and revise and improve theories. And this is how science advances, and indeed it does advance in a way that other forms of knowledge. Don't. But I'm still left with that question of without waxing mystical or non-scientific about it. Other people's knowledge of the world, especially a natural world with which they're extremely familiar, whether their knowledge isn't preferable. Isn't preferable to what seems to be, in this case, the scientific consensus. But at the same time, I do accept that to agree that there is such a thing as an ape-man, that it's ontologically on a par, in other words, epistemologically also with Homo floresiensis. I do understand they need a body. And indeed, we need to find find a body in order to prove definitively that this book isn't a load of isn't a load of nonsense or whatever else you want to make of it. But you asked me the other question, of course, about what. Studying what Leo say about their local ape-men tells us about the relationship, interactions between modern humans, or one group of modern humans at any rate, and creatures which are not quite human. And I think I think that's a good phrase to use in this case. I mean, for one thing, I found among the most valuable features of several eyewitness accounts that people had reacted to them in a way that suggested they found the sight of these things uncanny, and specifically because they looked human but not quite. There is this notion of an uncanny valley which was developed in robotics, which I mentioned in the book, as a matter of fact. This is the idea, of course, that if you make a robot that looks exactly like a human being, it doesn't bother people terribly. But if it's not quite perfect, if there's something indefinably wrong about it, then people become unnerved, scared, even, and this, amazingly, this was a feature of putative eyewitness accounts that I was recording and which I discuss in the book. On the whole, that there is, humans are fearful of ape-men, Leo humans, but at the same time they describe the ape-men as being scared of them, so that encounters, they usually don't last long enough for any, because of a fear on one side or the other or both sides, that they don't last that long. There is no as they describe it, there is no relationship between these two types of advanced primates, and that another possibility, alternative possibility or interpretation I discuss in the book is that what they're describing as ape-men are in fact perhaps a small-bodied population of hunter-gatherers, something like the Negritos that are found in other parts of island Southeast Asia, mainland Southeast Asia as well. And there are a number of reasons why that's extremely unlikely. one of the main reasons I discuss is the fact that wherever such hunter-gatherers, Negritos, for example, are found in Southeast Asia, there is a definite relationship, maybe not entirely positive, but there is a relationship between the two groups, which has been going on for hundreds and perhaps thousands of years. In terms of trade, for example, even a certain amount of intermarriage. And there is no reason to believe from the descriptions by Leo that any such thing has been the case with the Laihoa, with their ape-man. I mean, there are this is worth mentioning as well. I think there are myths about, as well as other kinds of stories, of course, about ape-men, and in some of those, not many myths, but there are some. But in some of those, there are tales of local people exterminating ape-men, trapping them inside a cave and setting light to the cave. This is a story, by the way, it's found all over Flores. In fact, I first discovered it among the Nage years before. But that's really the only, George, just about the only instance where humans are described as being aggressive and violent towards these hominoids, and endeavouring indeed to kill them, to wipe them out, even. But that's something that doesn't come up in, well, certainly not in the individual eyewitness reports. So on the whole, I'd say many Leo at any rate, seemed fairly magnanimous towards the ape-man. They didn't want to come across one. And indeed, I mean, they are described as creatures of high mountain forests, places where Leo don't normally go. I have a number of questions here regarding the possibility of contact in the past, including the distant past. And we don't really know. When Homo sapiens first arrived on Flores, or indeed if after their arrival they stuck mainly to lower-lying coastal regions, and when it was they moved further upslope towards the mountains, the mountain tops, which now apparently, and perhaps then as well, was where this other species of hominin, hypothetical other species of hominin, has probably always, always stuck to and always stayed in. So yeah, a lot of interesting questions, but on the whole, people, one critic, in fact, said something to the effect that the possibility of something like Homo floresiensis surviving to the present on Flores was, I think he said the possibility was near zero. Interestingly, he didn't say zero, but he stuck to this kind of quasi-probabilistic proposition that it was near zero, in other words, highly unlikely. But in that regard, I tend to recall a statement made by Mike Morwood, who was the Australian leader of the discovery team that found Homo floresiensis. Morwood accurately discussed the improbability of finding, for various reasons, for finding something like the fossil Homo floresiensis. And I would suggest that before it was discovered, if you suggested something something like that was about to be discovered, they would have rejected it certainly, and perhaps that possibility is near zero. So yeah, no, you can say that the ape-man is an impossibility, but there are counter arguments.
Okay, very well. So, yeah.
Those are the ones I was interested in following to wherever they led.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the book is a fascinating read. I will be leaving a link to it in the description box of the interview. Again, it's Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid. So, Dr. Forth, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me as well. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you like what I'm doing and to help me keep the channel sustainable, please visit my Patreon page or PayPal and consider making a pledge there. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share the interview, leave a like and hit the subscription button. The show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters, Karen Litska, Anne Blanchett, Paraga Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Frederick Sunda, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Kessel, Olaf Alec, Jonathan Wiesel, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollesy, Enrique Alenia, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Voss, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Newberger, Goldstein, Dan Demetriou, Robert Windager, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Colombo, Jorge Espinha, Phil Cabana, Mark Blythe, Roberto Iguanzo, Michael Stormir, Eric Neumann, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Ugni, Alexander Dunbauer, Fergal Cusson, Evan Bodrenko, Hal Herzog, Don Ross, Jonathan Librant, Oslin Bullitt, Nathan Nguyen, Stanton T, Samuel Correa, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, J.W., João Eira, Tom Hummel, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Deza Araújo, Eden Solon, Romain Roach, Dmitry Grigoriev, Diego Londoño Correa, Tom Roth, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavel Ostazewski, Nelek Bach, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Al Ortiz, Guy Madison, Gary G. Hellman, João Linhares, Lida Cosmides, Saima Afzal, Adrian Yegi, Nick Golden, Paulo Tolentino, João Barbosa, Jules Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Pons Cortez, Ursula Litska, Denise Cook, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, and Todd Shackelford. My producers Cesar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Staffini, Kian Gilligan, Luís Caetano, Tom Vanagdam, Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, Vega Guidi, Sardas France, Thomas Trumbull, and Nuno Welder. And my executive producers Michel Rugieski, Rosie, James Pratt, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, and Bogdan Kanivets. Thank you for all.